Hi everyone, this is Piyush Ranjan. I'm the founder and chief consultant of Management Masters. We are a boutique admissions consulting firm for the world's top MBA and MIM programs. In our video interview series, today we have a very special guest. We have Jay Bhatnagar with us, who graduated from Insead in 2019, and he's currently working with BCG as a consultant. So, without further ado, let's have Jay on the line. So, Jay, thank you so much for joining us. Could you just give a brief introduction about yourself to our viewers?
Sure. Thanks, Piyush. Thanks for having me. So, as I said, I'm Jay. I'm based in Gurgaon, currently working as a consultant with Boston Consulting Group. As Piyush mentioned, graduated from INSEAD in 2019. And prior to that, worked for about 6.5 years in human capital consulting, was in Hong Kong for 4 years, Singapore for a year, and a year in Delhi. So yeah, that's a bit about myself. Apart from that, I'm an avid sports nut. Love playing all sorts of sports, watching sports. Currently playing a lot of squash and golf during the lockdown. The only, I guess, socially distance acceptable sports right now. So yeah, that's a quick overview about myself.
That's very nice to know. At least somebody is getting some sports out.
Yeah.
That's very nice to have. So Jay, you mentioned that you had like almost a 6.5 years of work experience before you started with your MBA. So could you just tell us about a bit more in detail about that? Like what were you doing and where were you working?
Sure. So I actually started my career on the recruitment consulting side. Started my career with Michael Page in India. Was with them for nearly 2 years, and then moved to Singapore, where I was leading the recruitment consulting practice for in the healthcare space in Singapore, and then did that for a year and moved over to Hong Kong, where I was working with at that time a listed American human capital consulting firm called Hudson. So I was an associate director there. Was leading a team of about 8 to 10 people, uh, essentially working a lot very closely with CFOs to help them with workforce planning, especially in the finance teams. A lot of finance transformation work was happening at that time. So it was workforce planning, it was talent advisory strategies, and recruitment as well. So did that for 4 years, and then obviously INSEAD happened.
Yeah. So coming from a recruitment consulting background, how did you, how did you realize that you actually wanted to go for an MBA, and when did you
Sure.
realize this? How did you start preparing for that? Could you tell us a bit about
So
that?
that's a good question, and sometimes I do think about how this MBA journey materialized for me as well. So I was having a fantastic experience. The exposure that I got in the 6.5 years that I worked was tremendous. However, at a certain point, I think in 2018, I always had sort of a desire to move away from the human capital space and get involved in more functions within the consulting space. So I really do enjoy the consulting or services aspect. However, I did want to sort of make a transition from just human capital and then try and get experience and exposure across functions as well. And realizing that what would allow me to do that was a career in management consulting. However, taking a step back, I also realized to make that transition into, say, a management consulting firm, uh, I had to get an MBA. And so that was one of the reasons why I decided to do an MBA, was because I wanted to look at a career transition. Obviously, there are other reasons to do an MBA as well, but from a career standpoint, that was one of the primary drivers.
Absolutely, absolutely makes sense. There are many candidates who work with us, who come to us, and they are
Yeah,
looking for a similar transition, right? And,
yeah,
and an MBA is absolutely suited for that. If you want to transition from one
yeah.
role to the other, move
Correct,
functions, move industries, move countries,
correct.
geographies.
Locations, yeah. Those
Exactly.
are
So,
those are some of
so
the things that you look at.
absolutely, MBA is absolutely perfectly suited. However, getting there is not that easy, right? So,
Yeah,
so it sounds very simple, but
yeah,
there are so many steps involved in it. And I
correct.
think with you, when you were working as an HR consultant, I'm pretty sure you did not have a lot of time available as well. So the first step that usually people encounter when they, or the first hurdle that people usually encounter is the GMAT or the GRE.
Yeah, yeah.
So how did you work on that? Like, how did you go about that and make sure that you had a good
Yeah.
school to apply to INSEAD and the other schools that you did?
That's a good question. See, I think there's two things that end up happening. Sometimes people do have the benefit of if they've decided to leave their job and just focus on the MBA application, then they have a lot of time on hand. But there are a lot of candidates like I was who still had a full-time job and had to go about preparing for my MBA application. So there you obviously realize there are time constraints. But what really helped me was having sort of a singular focus that, look, this is something I really want to do. And once you do have that focus, things fall in place. Discipline comes into matter. The sort of goal that you set for yourself comes into play. So what I did was I knew I wanted to do my MBA. For that, as we rightly said, GMAT is an essential first step. So I actually prioritized uh, time time schedule, so to speak, during the week, and more or less spent a significant chunk of my weekends actually studying. And I was in Hong Kong at that time, and I didn't leverage sort of a coaching institute or whatnot. This was more self-study. But again, having that discipline to dedicate time, being very clear about what sort of resources that you want to leverage as well. Because for a GMAT or a GRE, there's so many resources out there. It can be overwhelming as well. And sometimes students get into this that I want to do X, I want to do Y, I want to do Z to try and absorb everything. But that's actually counterproductive. Just really identifying 2 to 3 resources, whichever ones they might be, and maximizing those and going very deep into those is important. So that again allows you to keep that focus and really get in depth. So I think time management is one, having that discipline, really having that goal in mind, and then things fall in place.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds perfect. It's almost, I often call the MBA application process itself as a mini MBA journey of sorts. Like
Correct.
it prepares you for the upcoming journey, right? There's
Yeah.
so much time management involved.
Yeah.
But then I think another question that people often face, and especially a lot of people with when they get high scores, how do you actually choose your B school? So was INSEAD the only school that you applied to? And how did you choose that you would want to apply to INSEAD or any other school that you did to?
Sure. So I think that's a very important question, and it's an important decision in the journey for any student who's looking at an MBA. Right? What is my target list of schools? I think what I tell people when I have chats with them offline is break it down into what you want out of your MBA. Number one would be what is sort of the career choice that you want to make after your MBA. Number two is what location do you want to be in. Number three is how much time commitment do you want to do. So for me, and just talking about my experience, those are the three things that I was thinking about while I was looking at what schools that I want to do. And I'll go into each point in detail. So number one, career choices. I wanted to look at a career in management consulting. INSEAD is, if not the biggest feeder school for MBBs.
Yeah.
Uh, that's why point one fit in INSEAD's favor. Number two was location. Having lived in Hong Kong and Singapore, and I actually did my undergrad in the US, I had a strong preference for being in Asia. And again, this is not a thumb rule, but business schools location matter in terms of where your job prospects are going to be as well. If you do your MBA in the US, you're exposed to more opportunities in the US. Similarly for Europe as well as in Asia. So given that my strong preference for being in Asia was there, again, INSEAD being, in my opinion, humbly one of the best schools in Asia, INSEAD fit the bill as well. And number three was, look, time duration. American schools, it's a 24-month MBA program. I was at a stage in my career where I wanted to do a 12-month course because I didn't want to be out of the job market for 24 months. Again, so these were the three key factors. And once I broke it down like this, INSEAD was just ticking all the boxes.
Yeah.
And I ended up just applying to INSEAD, which is not the smartest thing to do. I think I also do tell people, look, always have buffers as well and multiple choices. But I guess things worked out for me, and I did end up getting into INSEAD.
That's absolutely amazing, and it's great that that you got into INSEAD, right? but yeah, definitely have buffers. Like have most.
Correct. I completely agree. I tell people, hey, don't do. This is one thing. Don't follow what I did. Have options. And it's always useful because there's no certainties in life.
Absolutely. And then I think when it comes to INSEAD, I have the next question, which is based on the most grueling part of the application for INSEAD, because INSEAD applications are they're not short MBA applications. They're a
Correct.
marathon, right?
Yeah.
So how did you approach writing those essays and making sure that the essays that you presented were great and totally justified what you are and how you want to move forward in your
Sure.
career?
Sure. I, again, the way I would look at this is I'd sort of break it down into sort of a process as well. I think number one is really being very self-aware and really spending however much time it is to think about what is it that you want the admissions committee to know. Thinking about what are your key strengths, what are those key experiences, almost just sitting down with a pen and paper or your laptop and writing things down just in long form. Okay, this is my story. Once you get sort of that broad idea about what you want to highlight, what your stories are, what your motivations are, and again, I always tell people try and be as honest about this because that will show through in your applications. So
Absolutely.
once you've got that, like, and again, it doesn't have to be 100% concrete, but once you have sort of some meat behind it, then actually thinking about MBA applications are like real estate. There's limited space. You have word constraints, but you also, people sometimes forget that there are two avenues. You have your CV as well as you have your MBA application. Now, for me, what I did was I then thought about, okay, what parts of my experience or my journey do I want to show on my CV? And what are the different aspects of me that I want to bring about my applications? Because again, I realize there's limited real estate or limited resources available. So making sure I'm able to showcase my entire sort of life's journey, and then allocating different parts of my career, my personal life between the CV and the application. So that's number two. Okay, there are certain points that I want to talk about in my CV, but I also realize that I don't want to replicate or duplicate that in my application because I'm wasting space because that's already been highlighted on my CV, right? So
Absolutely.
that's the second part of it. And I think number three is really, and this is, and I highly recommend this to all students, is try and speak to as many alums, current students in the target schools that you're looking for. It's not just so you can quote them in your application, but look, it's not only schools that are evaluating you, you are equally evaluating schools. So
Exactly.
once you've spoken to enough people, you'll get a feel for, is X the right school for me? And if you think it is and you're excited, again, that will show through in your application.
Yeah.
So I reached out to a lot of INSEAD alums, current INSEAD students, to really understand what is the INSEAD experience? What are they looking for? How is that people's experience? And then I tried to see if that's what I want. And when the answer was yes, that's how I was able to write my applications as well, to showcase why I think INSEAD is the right school for me and why I think I would be good for INSEAD.
Absolutely. Sounds absolutely amazing. And as you rightly pointed out, almost if somebody has not understood that, it's not a simple or a very it's a pretty simple process, but it's not a quick process. It's something
Yeah,
that really is going to take your time, and it
correct.
needs you to invest in that process.
Absolutely,
Absolutely.
and I think sometimes again, when I've spoken to students and I've seen people make some mistakes where they just go so singularly focused on the GMAT that 70% of what they think in their head is just the GMAT and
Yeah.
30% is the application. I actually don't think that's true. The application is a very time consuming process, even though it's limited amount of words. To really nail it, it's a very iterative process, and you need to
Absolutely.
factor in enough time and invest, because that is really really important, because most business schools just look at it as GMAT as an immediate first level filter. But what's really going to make sway that decision making process is your application. So a requisite amount of time needs to be factored in to really get your application right.
Absolutely. So one final question on your pre MBA journey of sorts. What would you say was the most interesting, or let's say the most difficult part of for you during this prep application prep process?
Uh, for me, I think it was really just shutting down aspects of my personal life for that 1 month when I was studying, for 6 weeks when I was preparing for the GMAT, because it's not easy. You have to make those sacrifices, whether that's going out, hanging out with friends, playing sports. I had to put some of those on the back burner because I knew I had limited time and I had to put in the effort. So I think for me, that was the hardest part, in terms of making those sacrifices, to just singularly focus on the GMAT while simultaneously having a pretty intense and working job as
Yep.
well. So for me, that was the hardest, but great learning experience as well. You learn a lot about yourself once you make some of those sacrifices.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's move to Insead. Let's put some focus there now. Now, obviously, if you're going to a top school, the kind of peers that you have, right? They are also going to be top notch.
Yep.
Everybody is an achiever. They have achieved as much, if
Yeah.
not more, as you.
Yeah.
So in this particular frame of, or rather, in this particular environment, how do you make sure that you stay focused? Because there's so many things happening as well, right? So how did you make sure that you are looking at the right things and you are focusing on that?
You're right. I mean, I think going to some of these schools, you're just exposed to the cream of the cream of students globally. And I think for me, if I just take a step back, I've always played competitive sports at a high level. And I think one thing that sports taught me is always be willing to learn and try and compete with people who are better than you, because that's when most of your learning comes in. And I think that sort of mindset while at INSEAD, uh, being around so many high achievers, my goal was to try and learn as much as I can from people, different aspects, and grow as an individual. I think that's a very important part of your MBA journey, is to try and learn from a very diverse and high achieving class of your peers. I think that's people sometimes underestimate, but the value of learning that you get outside of the classroom, which is non-academic, from just being around such talented people who have so many different point of views and life views, is very important. So that's how I approached sort of that environment of high achievers. I was there with a focus of trying to learn right from them as well. You're right. Look, I think an MBA program, and especially in INSEAD, because it's super condensed, is there's so much happening. It is very important for any student, whoever's going into an MBA program, to actually take a step back before they go in and say, look, what do I want out of this MBA program, right? Once you prioritize 2 or 3 things, one could be, look, I'm here to really make a very strong network. It could be that, look, I'm here to lead some clubs. I want to get exposed to some different clubs. One could be that, look, I just want to learn a lot of subject matter in class, right? One could be like, it's just my job that's really important that I get after my MBA. So once you've identified what are the 2, 3 key things that you want from your MBA program, you put your energies during that year or 2 years into those things, right? So that becomes very important, because there's so much happening and
Yeah,
it's not humanly possible to be involved in everything. You will
absolutely.
have to make trade-offs. So for people, students, to understand what is it that they really want out of the MBA program, and focusing on that during it. For me, one was, look, I really want to grow my network, build strong and lasting relationships with my peers. And the other was a career, right? And everything that I did on campus was with that. I was leading a lot of clubs, but again, it was to build those relationships and bonds with my peers as well. So that's important, I guess. Prioritizing what you want out of your school or your program, sorry.
Absolutely, absolutely. And did you face any special, or let's say some unique challenges as an international student, working in, like studying in Singapore and looking to work there post your
So
MBA?
for, for me, it wouldn't be the case, because I've lived outside of India for 11 years.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so for me, it was, and I'd lived in Singapore before INSEAD as well. So I don't think I had any challenges per se. And I think, look, I think INSEAD is such a global school, right? Everyone who's coming into that school is an international student.
Yeah,
Everyone's an international student.
yeah.
So these are shared unique experiences that you have. Because again, within INSEAD, even Singaporeans would be going to Fontainebleau, which
Mm-hmm.
where they would be international students as well. So everyone's an international student. So I don't think any unique per se challenge that comes up. So I don't think I personally faced any challenges.
Yeah,
But there are obviously challenges when you go to an MBA program. You're living in a different country, but I think that's a shared experience amongst your student body, um, and nothing which can't be dealt with.
absolutely. And so so before your MBA, you wanted to go for an MBA so that you could break into management consulting, right?
Yeah.
So how did the NCR experience actually help you make that transition? And how did you focus on making sure that you met those career objectives, while you were at NCR? Could you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. So, look, I think INSEAD, as we already discussed, is a big feeder school for management consulting firms. Uh, what the benefit for me at INSEAD was, because a lot of these global consulting firms sponsor a lot of their students to come to INSEAD. Number one was just actually having conversations with the sponsored MBB students who were on campus. What is this? What is this job about? Like, you always hear about it. Like, really trying to understand what is the job, what do they like, what do they not like, and then actually internalizing it and figuring out, is this what I want to do? I know people who came into INSEAD thinking they want to get in consulting, but after having conversations with some of the sponsor students, they said, this is not for me. And so for me, after having those conversations, I said, look, this is something I want to do. So that was the first part, like really helping internalize and crystallize that, is management consulting a career that I want to do? Once I had that answer, yes. The next was, like, I think with business schools and any of these top schools, it is so institutionalized, the management consulting career path. You have a lot of groups, you have a lot of talks, so that information is always readily available.
Yeah.
It then becomes about how do you sort of channelize, and we could talk about that later, as in terms of the interview processes, identifying which are the right firms for you. So that's the way you would look at it. But just one thing about INSEAD as well, I think why it helps you in a career in management consulting is because it's very similar. I think at INSEAD, you work with very diverse and global teams. Management consulting, you're always working with different people in different projects.
Yeah.
That's one. Number two, INSEAD is always, it's a condensed 12-month program. So everyone has to prioritize a lot. Management consulting is always about looking at problems through an 80-20 lens, prioritizing what are the high value levers.
Absolutely.
So that entire 10-month experience sort of trains you towards a career in consulting as well.
Yeah.
At INSEAD. So yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, and I really like, the consultant, the consultant way that you are explaining and breaking down everything into those specific pointers. That's absolutely amazing. I think the viewers are going to love this, and we are going to make a lot of short short snippets out of this interview as well. I think that's going to be absolutely perfect. A very I think almost the ending question for us would be something like, what would you say that you would wished that you knew before you actually went on to your MBA journey? Is there something like that?
What would I have wished I knew before I went into my MBA journey? I think it was just a fantastic experience. I just honestly tell people to just go in and really enjoy it. Like, just take everything that comes. Don't have preconceived notions per se. That whole experience is just fantastic. I mean, if in hindsight and sort of in a joking manner, I wish INSEAD could have been longer, because I had the time of my life. That 1 year for me was fantastic. Now in hindsight, when I look at it, I'm like, I wish it was longer as well, because I could have continued that whole experience longer. Yeah, I think that's I think it's just going in and really absorbing and taking in everything and being open to new experiences, because that's what an MBA about. Really getting those new experiences.
Sounds amazing. Now we have a new segment in our interview series nowadays, that we started doing rapid fire questions. Right. So this is we are sort of becoming a bit more professional in terms of video interviews, right? I should rename this to Coffee with Piyush.
Do I get a hamper at the end of it?
You don't have any competition right now, so
I don't have any competition.
But it's very simple, like rapid fires work. I'm going to ask you a series of like 5-6 questions, and if you could answer them in maybe 1 word, 2 word, or maximum 1 sentence, that would be perfect, right? All right, so let's start with this. What do you find? What is the biggest myth about MBAs that you realized after going there?
That everyone will be very competitive and it'll be a very alpha environment. Though that's true, but people are really nice.
All right. What was your biggest apprehension before you started your MBA?
Will I get a job after it? Is it the right investment?
All right. What do you consider to be the most helpful resource at Insead?
Your fellow students.
What was your most favorite part about the application process?
The journey in self-discovery. You actually get to think a lot about who you are and what you've done in life.
Right. I had a question about what would you like to change about your MBA experience. If you want to have another shot at it, except the increasing INSEAD deviation part, please feel free.
I would have loved to go to Fontainebleau. Unfortunately, things didn't align, so I couldn't do part of my INSEAD at Ponty. But hopefully, whenever travel opens, I'll make a visit down there.
Absolutely. And what was the most fun club or event ever that you attended at INSEAD?
I was president of the Sports Business Club, and we'd got Chatri Sitadong, who's the CEO of One Championship, and the guy is phenomenal. I think that was one of the best talks I've ever heard in my life.
Perfect. And the last question that I have, what do you think is the most important step while you are searching for your B schools?
Just be true to yourself about what you want out of your MBA, and then evaluate schools.
Absolutely. It's been a lovely answer session. I think I've loved this interview. It's been very candid, very authentic, and it's absolutely amazing to have you here, Jay.
Thanks a lot, Piyush. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and hopefully through my experience sharing, there are certain insights that students can leverage. But this has been amazing, and thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.